A hearty welcome everyone back to Taraka Railways, and today we're going to have a look at the BR Early Crest 460 Class B17/6, and it is the Leicester City Football Club, and it is the footballer loco in other words, and the locomotive number is 61665. Now, if we look at the boxing of the locomotive, a very clear illustration of the Brunswick green locomotive in front of us. Nicely wrapped in the sleeve box and normal safe packaging from Hornby, along with the maintenance instructions, and that's on that little famous Hornby little sheet, black and white, and also the product code and the date it was manufactured. And also along with the detailed pack, and it is jam-packed with a lot of things in it. I'm gonna have to look and study them closer and have to do the fitments with that, but very interesting, and it's good to have these accessory packets with the logos. It just adds value to your logo, and really appreciate the fact that Hornby does give us those extras to fit on the locomotive. It's really nice, and it really makes us feel that we get value for our money spent. Now, if we look at the box illustration, and before we get to the illustrations, we're just looking at the back of it. We're looking on the side now first, and then we will see that it is model 3523, and that's the BR Early Crest 460 Class B17, Leicester City, number 61665, and the locomotive is double O gauge and DCC ready. And if you're looking at the rear side of the box, you'll see it's a Class B17/6, and it's a 4MT. Description there on the box, as well as the normal history that normally is featured on Hornby's locomotives, history of the locomotive, and on the far right we will have the illustration of the locomotive and diameters and information about the locomotive there. So before we have a look at the locomotive, just to look at the little detail pack with all the accessories, I can see some steps, extra steps and vacuum pumps, and the additional coupling provided. But there's a whole lot more in here, and we have to open it and unpack it to see what exactly it is and where it fits. Anyways, moving on to the locomotive now here on the round table. You'll see that the locomotive have metal sprung buffers and nice red buffer beam housing, great riveting also visible in the front, and there's a hook and the front coupler, and obviously making provision for the additional coupler in the accessory bag. And there's also a pocket for the vacuum pump, as well as the loco class, the class of the locomotive painted on the beam, and there is lamp pines applied and two small handrails at the bottom, and you can see the cylinder and the smoke box door and the sled code, and always great to see the shed codes painted on the locos, and we'll see 30 Colchester and BK region, and the number of the locomotive nicely applied 61665, part of the B17 famous football running locomotives, and the naming Leicester City. So we'll also see a lampine on top and the chimney, very well done and well illustrated extras. So moving on the side of the locomotive, everything basically the same, but on the left it has the reverse rod, and you can see clearly the football in the center part of the famous B17 naming plates designs. So with this nameplate you'll see the name of the team in gold with a black background, and this was the only loco in B17 done by Nigel Gresley. Locomotive features the same livery on the running board, and the axle covers also covered in black and gives a great fine finish to the locomotive. The motor in this model is a 5-pole screw motor, and it's an 8-pin DCC ready locomotive. The livery, as you can see, in lovely Brunswick green, and the lining in orange black. Steam piping quite visible, handrails and whistles, and also full display on front splasher. And now moving on to the cab. The cab printing on the side is nicely done with orange black lining too. The number nice and crisp, and the route ability on the cab side, and the cab doors nicely applied, and steps to the cab, glazed windows, and the steam cab looks of great finishes, loads of great finishes there, a wealth of finishing extras. It also features great dials and whistles inside, and a regulating in silver and others in brass, and water gauges look full, and a wealth of great detail once again in the cab of this locomotive. Now moving to the front of the tender, you can see the 2 handles and the picked out in red, and a buffer in front of the tender, and also some toolboxes, the coal and the cold flow opening, and the side of the tender also outlined very nicely, steps visible, and all nice and crispy applied. And very important, handrails standing out on both sides of the tender as well. Now looking at the back of the tender, much like the front, metal sprung buffers and great details as can be expected by Hornby. The buffer beam in red, and the at least 3 lampins and handrails, and on the top you can see the top view of the cylinder of the tender on top, and the aerial view of the tender. You will see the coal load nicely applied as well, and the water filter, as well as rivets, hooks, and also to mention is that the coal load is also movable, and you can see the 2 toolboxes also. And on the loco we can see the air vent, and it can be opened, and we also see some rivets, and obviously the cab is painted in black, and just again the whistle is quite great finish, and the safety valves, and they are metal, and then you can see the boiler, and I think next to the chimney over here is a superheater. So now taking a look at the locomotive underneath, you'll see the holes underneath the cylinders, and that's obviously for the extras in the detail pack, the fittings. And there's also the holes for the brake rigging, and the great brake shoes are molded on, and pickup for 4 wheels on the locomotive, metal wheels, and steps are also visible on the sides. And then moving on, you'll see the loco and tender connector. Now for some of you you that no, the previous locos was had issues with the tenders and loco connections, and that's why Hornby actually introduced this plug-in electrical connection. And now obviously we're going to move into the history of this locomotive. In 1926, with increased loading on the East Anglia passenger services and the introduction of modern vacuum-braked coaching stock, there was a desperate need for a locomotive that could supplement the Holden B12 class on the former Great Eastern routes of the London North Eastern Railway. Track limitations prevented the transfer of locomotives from other regions, and so Nigel Gresley was tasked by the LNER to produce a 3-cylinder 460 design. Using the cylinder and motion arrangement of the D49, but with tractive effort of about 25 000 lb and a relatively light axle loading of 17 tons. The resulting B17 design arose from Doncaster Works' inability to completely satisfy Gresley's specification and the resulting contract for the detailed design and building of the class was, in 1927, given to the North British Locomotive Company in Glasgow. Using some of the features from a batch of A1 Pacific locomotives they had built in 1924, along with the same features from the Royal Scot class produced for the LMS, the cab, cylinders and motion were all copied directly or modified slightly, whilst most of the boiler design was taken from the Class K3 and Class O2 designs. The first 10 locomotives delivered by the North British Locomotive Company were designated B17, later B17/1, whilst the second and third batches, having boilers supplied by Armstrong, Whitworth and different springing, identified as B17/2, and the next two batches, again with new springing, were designated B17/3, but as the locomotive passed through the works, the original springs were replaced by those of the later design, and in 1937 the three subclasses were merged together as B17/1. The final Darlington batch, introduced in 1936, as well as those built by Robert Stephenson and Company, had 4,200-gallon tenders and were intended for use in the northeastern area of the LNER. These were designated B17/4. In September 1937, number 2859 Norwich City and 2870 Tottenham Hotspur were streamlined in similar style to Gresley A4s, renamed East Anglian Service, and having little effect on the overall speed at the locomotive, and in April 1951 was removed. Between 1943 and 1957, most of the surviving members of the class were rebuilt with 100A boiler for increased pressure and were designated as B17/6. Locomotive 61665 Leicester City entered service as LNER number 2865 in January 1937, having been built at the Robert Stephenson Works as a B17/4. The locomotive's first allocation was to Sheffield, followed by a short period at Gorton until late July 1938, when it was allocated to its hometown of Leicester. Further spells at Cambridge and Doncaster were followed by a return to East Anglian sheds at Ipswich, Yarmouth and Norwich. The LNER B17, also known as Sandringham or Footballer class, named after football clubs. None of the class locomotives survived into preservation, but a few of the football clubs the locomotives were named after were presented with the nameplates after locomotives were cut up themselves. Overall, this is not a bad locomotive, certainly value for money, and it runs beautifully on the layout at Taraka Railways. Thank you once again everyone for joining me at Taraka Railways. I really appreciate your time and I really appreciate your comments. So please do like and subscribe and please leave those comments. I always look out for them and I trust everyone is gonna have a great weekend. Thanks once again. Take care. All my best. Regards, Elizabeth.